So Halloween was extraordinary. It was made for no money, in no time, in a way that was unusual for films to be made, and certainly has never been replicated since I've been in the movie business. I knew that after finishing Halloween 2, that I couldn't do another horror film, or I would have no opportunities. I was worried I wasn't going to have any more opportunities anyway. But I was young enough, and I felt that although I was the Scream Queen, I still felt I had other opportunities coming, and that if I didn't stop then. So it was probably the only conscious decision I've ever made as an actor, to not do something. I actually said it out loud. I said, that will be it, I'm not going to do any more.
When I first got involved in what was Halloween 7 and would soon become Halloween H20, there was no Jamie Lee involvement. It wasn't even a thought. It was going to be direct-to-video, home video. And Richard Potter at Dimension Films had said, look, you're going to go in with, I think it was 2 or 3 other writers, and you have to sell the idea and the pitch to Mustafa Akkad at Trancas International. Now, I had grown up on the Halloween movies, been scared to death by the Halloween movies, and had always seen that opening title card, Mustafa Akkad presents Halloween. So I was thrilled to get to meet him.
There was the idea, yes, pick up where Halloween 6 left off, and there was ideas to sort of abandon that storyline. Ultimately, what we ended up with at the end of 6 was just so many loose ends that really, I don't think anyone had the appetite necessarily to resolve them.
So I prepped my pitch on Halloween 7, which basically, they had said pretty early on, we want to kind of start fresh and not be a direct sequel to Halloween 6. So you can ignore the thorn and kind of start from a fresh perspective. So that's what I did. I came in and I pitched an idea where it took place in this secluded all-girls prep school up in the mountains, and that Michael Myers finds the school and there's some relation to one of the students. There was this copycat serial killer kind of in the vein of Silence of the Lambs, where there's someone that's helping them catch Michael Myers. And so we did this whole draft where he's helping the detective track down this killer, Michael Myers. So that's how I got the initial gig to do the first draft of Halloween 7, which was called Two Faces of Evil, and this was, again, pre-Jamie Lee.
We got the support of my father and the Weinsteins, and the idea was, let's really make this something special. And so the budget was upped, and the idea was, let's get Jamie Lee Curtis back. And I have to say, I have to give that credit to Bob Weinstein. I think it was Bob who approached her.
And I did it out of loyalty to the fans of Halloween, as my way of saying thank you so much for, being supportive.
Because it was the 20th anniversary and Jamie coming back, in a lot of ways it was a fresh start. It was a fresh crack at this, and it could sort of pick up from where Jamie's work had left off earlier. And I thought everyone was encouraged and excited about that.
I got a call from my agent saying, Bob Weinstein wants to meet with you. And he was great. He was like, read your draft. Love it. Great writing. I got good news, I got bad news. I said, okay. He's like, the bad news is we're not using it. We're throwing it out. I'm like, okay. That's the bad news. Well, what's the good news? Because the good news is Jamie Lee Curtis has agreed to come aboard. We're going to do a 20th anniversary theatrical release, and we want you to incorporate her into this idea of the all-girls school, however you want to do it, but it's become a whole different shebang now. So of course I was thrilled that this was going to be morphing into what I thought was a little direct-to-video, home video release to this theatrical release with Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, it was a surreal moment.
I was happy to be in it, but it was weird to have John not be there. John didn't want to direct it.
John's name always comes up at some point whenever you're doing one of these, because he's just, he's the man. I mean, his fingerprint's all over this series, whether he'd like to know it or not, but, we're all doing any one of these directly from his. So his name did come up, and I don't remember the exact specifics of the negotiations, but at some point they did break down. As I recall, Jamie had worked with Steve Miner in the past. She was someone that she felt comfortable with. The fact that Steve Miner had directed Friday 2 and 3, it was discussed, and we were well aware. We thought they were, good films, and maybe there was a sense of, he has some of that early slasher experience, and I think everybody was encouraged by his work and what his vision for the film would be.
Steve and I had been doing movies probably for 10 years before that happened. We were going to do this movie called Lake Placid, and by the time that movie was going to start, when it got greenlit, when Lake Placid got greenlit, the weather was going to be horrible. So they decided we could wait until summer. And in the meantime, Jamie had contacted Steve because they had worked together on Forever Young. I was familiar with Halloween because it came out at a time when I was working on a horror movie called Phantasm. So Steve said to me, hey, remember how you used to do horror movies too? What do you think about revisiting that? I wasn't that crazy about doing a sequel. But when we talked about it, the idea was to try to pick up more sort of the John Carpenter vibe, like after part 2.
Having worked on several horror films for Dimension Films over the years, particularly Scream, Scream 2, Mimic, coming onto H20, there's a certain expectation that it was going to be harder than it needed to be, which it was and it wasn't. It was certainly, of all the films I edited for them, one of the easiest to cut, which was great.
We literally had an opening that remained the same from that very first pitch all the way through to the theatrical release. Now, it wasn't the nurse, Loomis's nurse, as it became in Halloween H20, but it was a nurse who comes home to find her office ransacked. I mean, it virtually stayed the same. So we kept that same setup.
I think I was still one of the very few survivors after Halloween 2. I mean, everyone else got killed off, and I was still alive. So I think they thought it might be interesting to see what happened to this Marion Chambers, this smoking nurse.
Hasn't anyone told you? Secondhand smoke kills.
Yeah, but they're all dead.
I was living a very quiet life, having had my identity changed to protect me. I was pleased to see that I almost escaped. I fought back. So, I mean, that was fun to see, that she did not go down gently.
Loomis was obsessed with Michael Myers.
Tom Kane, who does the voice of Dr. Loomis, is an old friend of mine. He was a voiceover guy. Tom does all sorts of voiceovers. He does the voice of, I think he does stuff in SpongeBob SquarePants, and does the voice of Yoda and C-3PO and all the video games and all the, in Clone Wars, and it does the professor from Powerpuff Girls.
They explained that what happened was they were looking for the speech, that he gave, that iconic, I met this little boy with the blackest eyes.
The devil's eyes.
Well, all they could find of the speech was Donald Pleasance's voice, but it was already mixed with some other stuff, some music and some sound effects. So they had to recreate it.
I asked him to come in and do it and gave him the Donald Pleasance tracks to listen to, and he came and recorded it and did a spot on job.
Patrick had in retrospect, a really brilliant idea. He said, instead of just playing Tom bits and pieces of Donald Pleasance, let's have his best friend sit here and try to tell, is that close, is that not close, or, and it was tough. I mean, I would give a line and they would play it, and I would try to recreate it, and I'd look over and this guy would just be like, And finally, at one point, it must have been the 50th take, I read the thing again, and the guy went, yes, that's it. That's Donald. That sounds like Donald.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living
behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
We frequently got, people just assumed it was Donald Pleasance.
Yeah, the cast of H20, we got, I don't want to say lucky because there was a lot of work involved, but they've all gone on to do amazing things. And it was a fantastic group of young actors, and what they've gone on since then just, proves that.
We all had a fantastic time. We all knew each other. We had great rapport because we were young actors trying to make ends meet out in Hollywood. And we were none of us had achieved any real level of success or fame that would give us an upturned nose toward any of the other ones. So we all ran around together for a couple of months. Young people just enjoying the fact that we were able to make a movie.
We could have a roaming orgy.
I love the way this man thinks.
I was a huge Halloween fan. I actually never thought it would happen for me. I didn't think I'd be cast in the film. It's one of my favorite horror series because of all the old-fashioned sort of scares.
I think when we got to set that everyone knew that this was going to be a really special project. I was so excited just to be to be on a Halloween movie where Jamie Lee Curtis is back, and I just think there was an energy to it in which everybody knew right away, like, this is going to be something really, really cool.
It's such a surreal moment to be there on set, and you see Jamie Lee as Laurie Strode, and she was fantastic. She was very welcoming.
As far as I'm concerned, I want the movie to be very much like the first movie. I don't think anybody here's a big star. I don't think anybody's acting like one. The budget is a reasonable budget. It's not big budget. If anything, this will be much more like the first movie than any of the subsequent movies.
She gets involved in everything. It's not she's coming to read her lines. She wants to get involved in the script, how the character dresses, what the end credit song is. And I love that about working with Jamie. It was so refreshing. She wasn't there just to, mark her hours and leave.
She got everyone to rally around this project in a way that you don't see all the time. It was really, really special.
That's it. That's enough. I can't take it, Mom. He's dead. Michael Myers is dead.
I was 19 years old, and it was my first film, so I was really nowhere in my career. I'd done one TV show and was just kind of getting started in the film auditioning world, and I had auditioned for Robert Rodriguez for this film called The Faculty, and right after that, I got a call from the Weinstein brothers. My agents got a call from the Weinstein brothers saying, we really like him for The Faculty, but there's this other script that we would like him to look at too. Would he go in and read with Jamie Lee Curtis for Halloween H show? So I came in, we had a good chemistry read, and I shot basically those two films simultaneously.
Now, at the time, it was that she had her son, was the only son in this all-girls school. She was that protective of him. And he was, kind of resentful of it, like, hey, Mom, why can't I go to the boys' school, 2 miles down the road? We opted against that and made it co-ed, obviously, later.
It was just trying to figure out how to make this one differentiate itself, or like, what can you do with the character that's a little bit more full-fledged than some of the ones that had come before.
Just one thing. I asked you to do one thing. Just one thing in your life.
Mom, I'm not responsible for you!
Parker! All right! What are you doing?
I was so new to the game, I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't very good at hitting my marks yet. Still didn't know where to go in front of the camera. Still thinking it was theater.
No, doing this. You're in the middle of it.
You're doing it. You're in the middle of it.
We're not in the liquor store.
We just read the goddamn line.
Fine.
Oh, relax. He's only Steve.
I actually do remember Josh. It was always an issue with the hair. They would make it all perfect, and then he would stick a hat on, or he would just muss it up right before we'd start shooting, and always kind of like he had just rolled out of bed.
It really bothered me when I saw teen films that everybody looked perfectly coiffed in. I just was not far removed from my high school days at this point. And I remember everybody looking like shit most of the time. And I hated that they were trying to make this character look a certain way, cookie cutter and out of the box. And I cut my own hair a little bit. It was a battle that I waged with the hair and makeup department. And I won because I was the one who got, I just carried the hat around with me and kept smooshing down my hair.
What are you two up to tonight?
Well, we thought we'd hit the town, pick up some guys, drop some roofies in their drinks, have a whole date rape evening.
Huh, sounds good.
Anytime that I can do anything a little bit strange or different, I want to. So they said, what do you think about changing your hair color? And I was like, oh, please, can we make it blue? Like instantly, first day I wanted to dye my entire head blue, and they just said, oh, we'll put some pieces in and that kind of thing. But we had fun. It was just the more the merrier, Let's put a nose ring on. And I was like, can we pierce my eyebrow as well? Do you think we can put a couple more? So I was just game for it all.
It was really rough to have to play her boyfriend and have make-out scenes and all that. I did a lot of rehearsals. I just wanted to make sure we got it right,
Adam was great. He was really sweet. It was when you have to meet someone and have instant chemistry with them, it's hard. And he was just a goofball like myself, so it worked out okay.
So originally, I was actually supposed to be the killer in H20. Little known fact, there was a version of the script when I first auditioned in which Charlie was essentially a copycat killer. And he was paying homage to Michael Myers. And of course, that doesn't work out so well for Charlie in the end, because you can't steal Michael Myers' identity and get away with it. He's going to come back and take care of you. So I got the role. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, Steve gave me a call and said, we're rewriting the script. We really want you to be a part of it, and we love what you did. But as things change, I think you're going to wind up being the horny best friend, which I was fine with too, because that's always fun.
Romantic dinner, candlelight, soft music, animal sex. You need a hormone suppressant.
Obviously, Michelle had something that was exciting to watch, and we enjoyed working with each other very much.
I think actually throughout my career, I've now worked with everybody from Dawson's Creek.
You gotta give me a chance, honey. I have to express myself creatively. We're paying the bills, aren't we? Ah, fuck me, shit!
The market research was showing that these films were huge with the African-American audience. The studio wanted to attract people from that demographic. Who better than LL Cool J?
Ronnie is a novice novel writer, amateur novel writer. He's a guy who's working as a security guard, you know, basically just so he can have time to write his books. I'm interested, period, in acting. That is something that I'm focusing on. That is something that I'm very serious about. I have every intention of pursuing an acting career with due diligence, you know? So, hey, I'm here.
When I found out that LL was going to be in the film, I was kind of freaked out because he was literally the creator of the first CD that I bought. So when I actually had to meet him, I could barely speak, and just like, he was such a huge part of my youth.
He showed up on set and I really didn't know what to do with myself. I don't get starstruck very often, and that one really did it for me. So I was completely petrified when he first got there. I was like, oh my gosh, that's LL Cool J.
He actually doesn't go by the name LL Cool J on set. He actually goes by the name Todd, which is a little more of a normal name than you would expect.
Come on, man, have a heart.
We're doing our scene together and he's barely paying me any attention. And I finally, like, you know, say something to him, you know. I'm a huge fan. I'm not joking. Like, I know everybody says these things. I love your music. It's been an integral part of my youth. So in the next take, he starts giving me a lot of shit during the take, like about being a mess.
Don't you do me wrong, okay? Not a chance, man. Get out of here. All right. Get out of here. Comb your hair.
I think he felt like the door had opened enough, that I'd broken the ice enough, that then he was free to give me shit for the rest of the production, which I take great pride in.
He was a blast, and I remember he also had an entourage with him everywhere he went. So there'd be 10 big guys behind him just for backup, just in case, you know, I was too threatening or, you know.
He used to stay after he was done shooting to watch the rest of the scenes that were happening that day. So he actually ended up staying and watching me get killed, which was great. He was my audience that day.
It was a challenge to find Shapey, as we called him, Michael Myers, who's going to be Michael Myers, because of the size, someone who could actually do anything on call. So I needed somebody who can act and who is enjoyable to be around. That's what you want on a set, you know, and who's obviously stunt qualified.
I was called in for an interview from Donna Keegan. I showed up not really understanding the importance of this character at all, which I think worked tremendously to my benefit because I wasn't nervous. I didn't read into it too hard. I had to kind of discover the character for myself, which was beneficial in the long run. I didn't try to mimic. It wasn't until 2 weeks into shooting that people were coming up to me on the street asking me for an autograph. Doctors, lawyers, housewives, that I kind of went, this is a bigger deal than I realized. This character resonates.
I knew under that mask that he had this big grin on his face. Like every time we yell cut, he would pull the mask up and he had just this big smile. So it's hard to, you have to really pretend hard that, oh shit, this is Michael Myers. This is the scary guy coming after me, when really you know he's this really nice stuntman.
He had to learn how to stalk correctly. He had to learn how to slash correctly, and he's obviously a physically intimidating presence.
So I decided that I was going to kind of play it like a big cat, Because if you've ever seen a big cat, a tiger, a lion, when they lock on prey, it's frightening. I mean, the difference between them sitting there and then all of a sudden locking on something they're going to go after is night and day. And so I would lock on my target each time I did the scene. I would tilt my head slightly down, I'd lock my eyes, and very low in my throat I'd growl to really put the energy into it and figure out how to be scary as a presence on film. Was by far the biggest lesson I learned on this. The energy you put in comes across.
I remember standing there in between takes, and all of a sudden up comes the shape. He's got the mask on, he's got the bloody knife.
I was anxious to meet him because I do write a lot, and that's always been one of the things I've admired.
And I'm just kind of, backing away from him, and he stands up and he says, "You're a writer?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I write." "Yeah, I've written a few things." I'm like, this is the strangest thing. I'm sitting here, and the shape with the bloody knife, is telling me how he's a writer. It was just bizarre. I'm like, who's underneath? Dude, don't kill me. I'll read your script. I'm sure it's great.
Chris was very sneaky. I knew him beforehand. We had worked together already, and he never took that mask off, so I never knew it was him. So he waited the entire time, and he would sneak up on me. I'd be at lunch, just eating lunch, and all of a sudden he'd pop out wearing the Mike Myers mask and scare the crap out of me. He did it every single day. We did all of our stunt work together, everything, and finally on the last day he took the mask off, and I think I punched him in the shoulder.
First day on set for me was a really interesting day. We were out doing the rest stop. Mother walks up with the little girl, they check the door, I peek out on cue, I duck back in, they come over to do this door to go in, they open the door, and there I'm standing in the mask, and nobody told the little girl that I was going to be there. And she went completely pale and freaked out, and they grabbed her up and carted her off as quickly as possible, and I ripped the mask off and chased after her, and it took about an hour before she kind of forgave me for that.
I am only, I can say, the protector of the franchise, because to me, Michael Myers, I love this guy. Everybody hates, but to me, I love him. And I keep protecting him on and on and on until, I don't know when, until I die.
And meeting Mustafa Akkad for the first time was great. I mean, you walk into his office, and he's like right out of old Hollywood. You get in there, and he's sitting in this high back kind of leather chair. He's got like the tweed sport coat with the patches, and he's got the pipe. And he literally looks like he walked out of 1930s Warner Brothers, and he's got this little wry smile and this little twinkle in his eye when he smiles. And he was always very, very supportive of the ideas I came up with, but he was very, very protective of Michael.
Early on in the discussions about what to do with the gun when LL Cool J gets shot, somebody suggested that Michael pick up the gun, which of course is the absolutely wrong choice. And everybody knew that, but Mustafa kind of overreacted in the meeting and went, "No gun, no gun!" So they decided to mess with him because his reaction was so strong. He's making it easy for everyone. So when we do the table scene, Mustafa's there, I'm standing on the table, they see Jamie, they pan up, they see me standing there with the knife. Mustafa's across the room with a whole bunch of people watching. I wait about 2 beats, I toss the knife aside and I pull the gun out of my back pocket and go, and there's dead silence. I'm like, oh, I'm fired. And then he goes, "Ah, you got me, you got me!" And then and then of course everyone busts out laughing, and then we went back and shot the real scene. So,
by the time H20 came around, I know that they had worked with K&B, and they were doing the show, and I knew that Mustafa had very strong feelings on how the masks should look.
And they had a version of all of the masks that had come before. And they had them all lined up on a rack so they could shoot them next to each other. And I put on each one, and they took photos with the different lighting with each one, and basically deciding which mask to use that came before or how to combine them and design a new mask.
There's really been a different mask sculpted and created for every movie, unless you're talking about the second movie, which they actually used the first mask on Dick Warlock, and his face is much rounder, and it just looks different, you know.
Initially, when they first shot the film, they used this K&B mask, which I refer to as the Casper the Ghost mask. This is very kind of featureless, and I wasn't a big fan of it. I mean, to me, what made him so scary, that mask, the original Shatner mask that they used, that there was some distinction and some features, and this was almost so featureless that it was kind of ethereal.
We were probably 3 weeks in the shooting with it when we got the call on the set that we couldn't use that mask.
The consensus in H20 was that the mask was not right, and we had shot a lot.
It was rejected by the Weinsteins by Dimension Films, which was exactly what happened on Scream with the Scream mask. If you look at the opening scene of Scream, you'll see the mask changes multiple times. There's, I think, 3 or 4 completely different masks than that. So when this issue came up, for me, it was no surprise. It was like, oh, okay, we're doing this again.
And with that K&B mask, it was almost comical rather than frightening. It's interesting to me that it went that far down the line.
Mustafa didn't like the take on it, so he decided to contact me. We made a few masks from the original 6 mold that we used for part 6.
And so there's a large brouhaha, and we're shooting the interior sequence that day where I kill the nurse.
And the director was very surprised to see us there. He had no idea that the mask was not liked.
Steve was furious. I'm kind of caught in the middle, being the guy wearing the mask, so I don't really know the arguments going on.
What he really wanted was a mask that didn't have any features and was very washed out and just kind of a blank slate. So I tried to paint them in a way that the features were very muted.
But we shot it with the K&B mask, and then we shot it again with the 6 mask, so that we had both versions, because Steve was still fighting to have the K&B mask, from what I understood.
The first time you see Michael in the film, that is the only time you see the actual mask from part 6 in H20 is that scene.
So they commissioned Stan Winston to create this other mask, and they went in and they did reshoots to the tune of, I think, $1.7 or $2 million to do just reshoots of close-ups. So they didn't go in and reshoot everything. So there are wide shots you can still spot in the film where you see the K&B mask.
There's also in one shot a cartoon digital mask, which literally looks like a floating cartoon head over top of the shape.
For that shot, I'm not sure why we didn't just reshoot it. It might have been because in that room, we already tore up that whole setup.
Editorially, it was just a challenge you had to sort of remember as different things were being reshot or redone within for the different masks of which version was going to be what. And at the end of the day, when it's all cut together, yeah, it changes, but you get the gist of it and it all works.
That's showbiz.
I had it in my mind that I had to be faithful to what Dean Cundy had done in the photography of 1 and 2. Anamorphic was definitely going to be something that we wanted to do. Unfortunately, at the time Halloween H20 came up, all the anamorphic lenses were taken up on action movies, so I couldn't even get any anamorphic lenses. So we had to shoot Super 35, but still compose for that anamorphic 235.
Watching Darren Okada on the set, like just watching him place the camera and the lights, and just, it was great to see him in action. He's just very methodical and just has it all in his head.
It was just all that orchestration, plus trying to get it done before the sun came up was always a trick of every night.
Hey.
Throughout the filming, we kind of would put in these inside jokes and a host of other things that Steve kind of slid in to let the fans know that he appreciated them. Do you want to die tonight? They had Scream 2 playing, and that's me in that mask, which a lot of people don't know.
Miss Tate, if I could be maternal for a moment.
Obviously, having Jamie's mother there and having the cycle car there. And
that was really neat to be able to see Jamie and Janet, two legends of the genre, in the same movie together, and in a Halloween movie at that, is very, very special.
And I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Well, the challenging part of working on, I think, any horror film is just trying to maintain that level of fright throughout and to keep it, to keep it fresh, not make it look too practiced, was always difficult for me. And then to do it over and over and over again, that was always the most challenging thing.
People kind of look at horror films like, horror films. They're incredibly hard to do. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of fear, rage that you have to portray. The circumstances are often arduous, and you also have to suspend a lot of belief, and you have to create a real sense of something that's the counterpoint to the unbelievable part of these films. And that takes a good actor.
So you actually don't see me die in the film. And I think on the page, there wasn't a lot to that scene. But I remember Jamie came up to me one day. We were sitting at lunch. She comes walking up and she goes, "Adam, we were talking for Steve and I were talking for 3 or 4 hours last night about how we should kill you." And I'm looking at her like, okay. She's like, "Yeah, so we came up with this really cool thing, and we want to stick your hand down this garbage disposal because you're going after the corkscrew." And I'm going, yeah. And she goes, "I really just want to chop it off. I thought it would be great if we just chop your hand off and it's mangled and bloody and gross and just put you through the ringer. But Steve thought it would be more suspenseful if we didn't do that and we just withhold it and just use that as a suspense moment. And then you turn and, oh, we see Michael." But she's like, "But I really wanted to chop your hand off." So I said, "Thanks, Jamie. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you have my back in all this." You'd think playing a corpse would be really easy. That's like an easy day on set where you're just lying there and you get to take a little nap or something. But it's actually really difficult.
My first reaction to finding Adam in the dumbwaiter was laughing, because what are you going to do? He has to be perfectly quiet. You look in, his neck is bent to the side, he's crunched up, and so I'm laughing just thinking of it now.
My eyes have to be totally still and wide open for the whole thing. So it was like, it was a 2-minute shot, and I'm just trying so hard not to blink.
And I remember I got him the first time, and I gave him a little elbow, and I was like, "Hey, Adam, what's going on?" It's hard to keep a straight face in that moment, but he's a trooper. The entire night he spent with a broken neck, dead in the dumbwaiter.
We actually did that whole sequence on the Universal lot. And the stage we were in was right at the point in which the studio tour, the tram, starts the ride. So every 5 minutes, these tourists are riding by in trams, and I've got this bloody, gross neck. And I just had such a blast because I would come out and I'd stumble out and I'd try and grab for tourists and reach out to them and try and get a rise out of people. But everyone was so jaded. It was all tourists with camcorders, and they kind of thought I was just part of the experience, part of the ride. I was very jealous of Jodie during that scene because, of course, she gets the true death scene where, having her leg crushed and bent was even painful to watch on set.
And then I'm pretty afraid of blood. I got so involved and so wrapped up in it that I didn't actually realize that I had cut myself during the night. And we got done, and I was so exhausted. I left the set, and I was staying in a hotel in LA at the time, and I walked in the lobby, and I had just taken my clothes off on set and thrown my street clothes back on over, and I didn't bother to shower or clean myself up or anything. I was just going home for the night. And I walked in the lobby, and the woman behind the front desk looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay? You're bleeding." And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, no, it's fine. It's just, it's fake blood. It's syrup blood. It's not a big deal. I'm shooting a movie." And she looked at me and she said, "No, honey, your leg is bleeding." And I looked down and I looked at my jeans, and there was actually blood coming through my jeans on my leg. And there was so much adrenaline happening, and I didn't even realize that I had cut my leg until later that night.
It's funny, on any project that I've been in where you have a prosthetic dummy, it just leads to everybody in the cast and crew just giggling and taking pictures with it and, like, you know, putting it in weird positions.
The realism of it was so repulsive. That thing was disgusting.
I don't care if it's a Lars von Trier film and everybody's super serious the whole time. Something about a prosthetic human being just lightens the mood.
The biggest, first powerful scene for me is meeting Jamie face to face at the door. I mean, that's when everything shifts gears.
And it's that moment, it's the beginning of the dun 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 part of it's the beginning of the heartbeat of the movie where your pulse rate's starting to race now. It's at that moment that the movie never, ever stops.
To see that kind of go from that moment where I was scaring myself in this little bungalow in a house and writing alone to the big screen and how the reaction that gets, you know, that one scene in the film and that was in the trailers and in many of the still photographies was very, very satisfying.
There was a horrific night that we had on the set for me personally. I had Michelle Williams riding passenger, Josh Hartnett in the back.
Donna was the Jamie stunt double, and we were driving away. We were supposed to be getting out of the school at that point. I think the gates closed right before she got through, dun dun dun, and she had to slam on the brakes. And this was 1998 when ABS or anti-lock brakes were kind of, sort of, not on every car, and Donna didn't know that they were going to kick back in the way that ABS brakes do, and she was supposed to skid the car.
And so I locked my right foot down as hard as I could, and it jackhammered.
She put her foot down, and the brakes kick back the way that they do when they don't want you to skid, and it broke her foot.
So it sent the bones in my foot up through my foot. Michelle's looking at me going, "You look strange." I said, "Just hand me the radio."
Jamie was taking care of her, sat with her the whole time, made sure she was okay, talking to her, and then joked with her about how cute the firemen were when they all showed up.
We have still pictures of her just trying to make me laugh because I'm crying and laughing at the same time because my foot is dislocated, you know. So I just set my foot and they took me off to the hospital, and that was a fun night.
I think that Michael Myers has probably had strong opponents the whole time in his life. And I think that probably the strongest was his first, me. Obviously, I have 20 years of anger and pent-up rage at what he's caused me, how he's ruined my life. And so I think I'm a very strong opponent for him. I think he may have met his match, but I won't say anything.
When she's coming back looking for me, we were trying to decide where Michael should come from. Do I rise up from behind? Do I come from around the corner? Come from off camera somewhere?
It just felt like if we wanted the shape to be as powerful as and as scary and as strong, you know, if you can have any kind of elevation over, you know, of him over the other characters.
And there was an overhead pipe, a water pipe, existing in the hallway with about a foot of clearance above it. And Steve looked up and said, "Can you come from there?" And I went, "Sure." And 5 minutes later, we were filming it. So it was very much a spur of the moment, and it ended up being one of the iconic scenes in the film.
Yeah, one scene in the film that was reshot is the entire ending when Jamie goes into the cafeteria. There was a version of that where it was shot with all the lights on, and it's really bright, and you can totally see it, and you can see everything. And then they reshot it during production. It wasn't reshot afterwards, it was during production with all the lights off.
Probably the most fun to do is flipping the tables. Coming after her as kind of the pinnacle of an avalanche, but what was happening around me was in reverse. It was all going backwards, and I was taking away hiding spots. So it was kind of a very powerful moment. And then it ramps up after that, and I like the kitchen where we fight, and I get the knife stuck in the drawer.
The director came up with the idea of, let's have Jamie stab McShapey as much as she can to get him off of the balcony backwards.
I had to come over a railing, and it's kind of a tight space, and it's kind of tough to fit through there and not get flipped over on your head.
I had to beat him like crazy to try to get him off, but at the same time not take me off. He barely fit through the hole. I mean, I got a little kicked in the interim, but my fear was I didn't want to stop him from rotating because he wasn't going to a bag, he was going to a table. That was a bit tricky.
In terms of the stunt work in this film, probably the biggest was coming through the window of the van.
We did a big sequence at night on a mountain where we're swerving all over because he's in a body bag and he comes back to life.
When you're going to hit the ground coming out of a car, and it's a dirt road up in the mountains, you have to kind of make sure there's nothing hard. There's no rocks, there's no little gravelly size rocks even that you're going to hit. So you have to kind of rake up the ground and clear it out. And Jamie walks by and says, "What are you doing?" And we explain it, and she stopped what she was doing and started picking up gravel and chucking it off the hill with the rest of us.
As I stopped short, he had to go flying on his stomach out the front window of the van, crashing, flying out 10 feet, tuck and roll, lay there for a count of 5 seconds, and then get up as though it never bothered him.
And we kept rolling all the way through to me doing the sit-up and the stand. That was all one take.
When the van hits Chris, that was actually an in-camera shot we did in reverse. It's always the simplest photographic methods that always make these things work well.
My understanding from the very beginning was Trancas International, they had creative say. They were the creative minds behind the project. And Dimension Films was the distributor, and neither the twain shall meet. Well, once it became the Jamie Lee Curtis version of Halloween, of course, Bob and Dimension wanted to have much more creative say in the process. And that came to blows.
You know, we had heard the producers wanted to maybe not see a head being cut off or anything. To us, it was about making sure that movie was going to deliver on its own. And we knew there was only one way that it could go. I mean, she had to swing that axe and it had to do what it was going to do.
I got a phone call from Bob Weinstein, and they wanted this to be the third and final installment of the trilogy, Halloween 1, Halloween 2, Halloween H20. So they wanted to end it with Michael Myers dying, you know, Jamie Lee just ending it. They said, but Mustafa doesn't want that. You know, he doesn't want to end it, of course, because it's his bread and butter, I mean, bottom line. And at that point, that's when I got the call that basically it was all, you know, on hold until they figured out legally who had what say.
Pretty much from day one of shooting, I understood that there was going to be a sequel. And the way everything played out to me, I knew that Michael was going to be killed, but I knew it had to be played as a double scene where they could carry on the franchise.
We had a draft where there was this whole dance scene in a gym, and it had like this, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, where, you know, the dance floor opens up and there's a pool underneath. And we did this whole scene where this thing's opening up, and Jamie Lee, Laurie Strode's got the axe, and she's battling Michael Myers, and he falls in the water and pulls her in after him, and he's trying to crawl out, and she grabs a javelin off the wall, and she drives it through him, and the floor is closing, and it closes on the javelin, so you assume he's been pierced and he's underneath the water, and that's it. She's won triumphantly. We had an ending that I wrote where they're on a bus, and it goes off a cliff, and it's teetering on this cliff, and there's this helicopter that comes to save Jamie Lee, and Michael Myers is grabbing her as this bus is teetering on the edge of this cliff. And just as the bus falls, you know, down this ravine, she's lifted off by the helicopter, and so he just kind of fades into nothing, and you assume he's lost his life because he's been in this bus that's dropped, you know, 300 feet.
For us to do something different would have, I think it just would have made it feel like we were just trying to play the audience for a sequel, which wasn't the case.
My understanding was Kevin Williamson went to Mustafa and said, look, here's how we're gonna kill Michael Myers, but he'll be back because you see, it's a guard that he switched bodies with. So in Halloween 8, you're gonna find out that wasn't Michael at all. So Mustafa was on board. So they came to an agreement, and I was able to move ahead with the ending where the shape loses his life to the axe.
There were audience reaction for the moment that she's holding this axe and she reaches out her hand to touch his hand, and the audience started to rebel and scream and no, don't do it.
We had a moment where he whispers, Laurie. He says her name. And then they said, well, no, if it's a guard, he wouldn't say that, so we're not gonna have any whisper in any voice. So.
And then she just sort of sneers, swings the axe, and cuts his head off. And it was like your team won the Super Bowl. I mean, the crowd went insane. I think so much of the film's success was because of that moment.
In retrospect, her decision was right. You know, that was very cathartic for the character and the audience to see her finally give it to her brother Mike.
There was, at the producer's request, Mustafa Akkad's request, a shot of the Shape walking through the gates at the very end of the movie. It was always thought of as, oh, well, this is so, if, you know, whoever continues the franchise next, if they want to do it, they can do it. But to us, that was never the real ending of the movie. It was never even part of it. We sort of pretend everything afterwards doesn't even exist. So the hardest part of the film was dealing with the score by John Ottman and what the expectations of that score were and what the delivery of that score became.
Steve Miner, he had sort of a vision of the score that I was excited by, because he sort of wanted to do sort of a Hitchcock approach to this slasher film, really, and I was like, awesome. So any license to do that sort of thing. And then of course there was the John Carpenter theme, which of course I thought, cool, I can do like a big orchestral version of that. That would be a blast.
We went through the entire post-production with a great temp track that we had used from a variety of different sources, that we previewed the movie with that temp track. We had requested to get a lot of sketches and hear the score as it was progressing. We had one review session before Steve had to go off to Lake Placid before he came back, where we heard some of the score, maybe 20, 30 minutes, and only a synthesizer version. It was promising, but we couldn't really tell what it was.
Steve came over and watched the cues, and it was like cool, and I think the editor had watched some cues too, and we were all on board with this approach, and delivered this, recorded the score with the orchestra and delivered it, and okay, done.
Then we got the final delivery of the score when we were on the mixing stage at Skywalker Sound, and we started to mix it in and discovered very quickly that the score was like it was for a different movie.
The decree came down from one of the Weinstein brothers. They were horrified because it wasn't like the temp score, and where I'd really completely departed from the music that was in the temporary score.
It was very over-orchestrated, very detailed. It wasn't a score for a Halloween movie. Michael Myers is a machine that is relentless and will not stop. That's what that Halloween theme does. The Ottman score was very counter to that. It was busy. It was, as Bob Weinstein put it, like it was for a movie about Heathcliff on the moors. You know, good music in its own right, but just wasn't right for the film.
I went up there and tried to salvage as much of the score as I could, making my case for the approach. And Steve was off directing Lake Placid, so he wasn't around in the dub stage. And I think the idea was to sort of anticipate what the studio wanted by throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
It was a bizarre musical challenge. You know, we tried a version with all of John's music in. We tried a version with like half of John's music in, and each one was resoundingly rejected by the studio.
The film tested really highly with a test audience and with that kind of, you know, in-your-face slasher kind of music. And, you know, from a producer's point of view, it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's not do a thoughtful score now. Let's stick to what we had.
They pulled up our release date from the end of September to August 5th or whatever it was. So suddenly we had to completely redo all the music in 5 days. So we shut the mix down at great expense.
course, I was horrified because obviously because I was the composer of that particular approach, and the new approach was basically just slasher. Every moment wear it on its sleeve, and don't let it up at any time, and don't be introspective or character driven. Just basically, and
we flew in Marco Beltrami to rescore some of the movie. We would have rescored the entire film if we'd had the time. If we'd had another week, we would have done the entire film. We had an army of music editors, and we just tried to make what we could of John's music work.
And so then it became sort of this weird amalgam of my score and basically the temp score. And it was all from Scream and Mimic and so forth. I did use, but it got dumped, the bump, ba-bump. That was disappointing because that was, I thought, for the fans to hear that piece of music, which is, which gets to you, especially if you've grown up with the Halloween, it really gets under your skin. But if they had something that was more shrieky and so forth, if they had the temp they put in. It's sort of a weird thing. It's like, a few bars of mine, a few bars of the other, a few bars, It's sort of a hodgepodge in the end. I guess it works on a visceral, I think a more hokey level, but,
I empathize with that. At the same time, I totally understand why it went the way it went.
A lot of my favorite parts of the score are still intact, mainly the title sequence, thank God, because that was something that was a lot of fun to do with this sort of montage in the beginning of the film. I get why the decision was made, and I can't say I fully support it, but I fully understand why it happened.
The final cue of the film is actually taken from the CD of John Carpenter's theme. That's because we didn't have any other version for it. We tried to do it, and Marco tried to duplicate the original sound. The problem was all those old synthesizers sounded the way they sounded, and it was very hard to duplicate at that time. The actual final cut of the movie was 17 frames taken off the last shot of Jamie in order for the original John Carpenter track to sync. Because it didn't sync up otherwise. So in my wallet to this day, I have those 2 frames, my 2 frames of the last of Halloween H20. It's an interesting keepsake to have dragged around for so long.
When H20 came out, it was great. I mean, everyone felt vindicated. We all felt that we had gotten our relationship with the Weinsteins down, to a really well-oiled machine, and what they were best at, and what we were best at, and how it came together. And then when their marketing machine kicked in, it was great. I think it took the series to a new level and opened it to audiences who had not been coming to the previous 3 films, maybe. Really put it out there in the mainstream.
And I went to this theater, and there was a line around the block for the 8 o'clock showing on this Wednesday, and it was for Halloween H20. And so we sat in this huge auditorium, sold out crowd, and just the reaction of those fans. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it.
I did attend the premiere, and I thought that everybody but me was great. I thought the film worked really, really well, except for that central character that I played.
What I really wanted to hear was what Deborah Hill and Dean Cundy thought. So I just went up to them and I said, "So how do we do?" And they both seemed to be really happy about it. So at that point, I felt like, at least, we all did our job.
All I ever heard was positive response from it. As soon as we left, I had people coming up and telling me what a great, fantastic death they thought I had. They thought that it was really scary, and I never heard a negative word about it. And I was just in a little bubble of Halloween love at the time.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really a special moment to get to finally see it up on the big screen and see Jamie up there again. How cool was that?
I mean, there's still people who say, "Why'd you ignore Halloween 6? It makes no sense." There's always going to be those people, but for the most part, the response from the fans and people who love the franchise, they love it, and it's just great to have been a part of it.
It does what a slasher movie is supposed to do. Hit you fast, hard, and early, and leave you having had a good time.
I guess in adjusted dollars, H20 was the most successful film to date, but it's still, none of the films have exceeded the original Halloween in terms of just pure profit.
And so to have some involvement in kind of the legacy of the franchise, it's still surreal. I mean, it's all these years later, and I still look back and I think, wow, I was a part of that what a lot of people call the trilogy, right? Halloween, Halloween 2, and Halloween H20.
It's gratifying to know that these things stick around and they have a life beyond that initial thrust into the public eye. It helped launch what became kind of a long life so far in films, and I'm kind of eternally grateful for these opportunities that I've had. There's nothing like your first.
Playing Michael Myers was an interesting step up for me. I never went into this business to act, and I was the super shy kid. It's given me a confidence that would have been hard to get otherwise, I think, and it was a huge learning experience.
I was hired to do Halloween Resurrection as stunt coordinator, and we couldn't bring Chris Duran back because he's American. And so they had to hire somebody from Canada. Their rule is mostly Canadian crew. It was only if you have to be. It was difficult at best.
Going into Halloween Resurrection, I mean, it was a whole different animal in so many ways. Yes, we were riding off the H20 success, but I think collectively we started maybe trying to imitate some things rather than put something out that was more original. We were starting to go into the found footage internet stuff, and we were getting caught up in kind of the stunt casting, and sort of, so we had LL Cool J in the last one, let's bring Busta Rhymes.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
My son, Gary J. Clayton, played Michael Myers at the age of 6. He was wonderful, did a great job. But again, the whole movie got cut like 4 times.
You know, we were trying to recreate the H20 success, and to whatever extent, I think it was clear that it was not quite as good.
My next move is to get out of show business. I'm going to get out of show business after this movie. Bye.
Jamie was resistant to even come back. She didn't want to do this, you know, this final sequel for her, for herself and for her character.
Hello, Michael.
Even back when we did Halloween H20, that contractually she had said, I'll be in the first 10 minutes of the sequel, but then you got to kill me off. So I was excited to see how this was all going to play. And then I saw the film, and I was so disappointed. To me, you went from a complete shot of adrenaline into the franchise, which was H20. I mean, it just totally revived it. It was like paddles to the chest. And then you just clonk this thing over the head with a crowbar.
To me, it was an oddity that Laurie Strode was able to be taken out so easily.
I'll see you in hell.
She took it hard. She took it hard. Or should I say, I took it hard.
But I'm grateful for that part. Laurie Strode was, you know, a complex person. She was intelligent. She was sensitive. She was vulnerable. She was funny. And she was a heroine. She was directly responsible for me being who I am. That part gave me everything.